I wanted to tell you guys the story of 3 separate staircases. Now, I'm in the cabin, and believe it or not, I'm on my 3rd staircase. Let's talk about the first one. Now, you might remember that when we bought the cabin, it was pretty gnarly, and the staircase was no different. I mean, it was original to the house when it was built in 1976, and it was ugly. But to be honest, it's about all they could do with the space that they had. But that doesn't mean I wanted to leave it. Of course I wanted to redo the stairs and make them better. Sure, that first staircase was ugly, and it obviously wasn't up to code, but I was alright with that because it fit the space. So my initial plan was just to rip it out, rebuild one that was almost identical, and convince the inspector that it had always been there and it was grandfathered in, so it was okay that it wasn't up to code. That is until I got an email from Deschutes County letting me know that the house never passed inspection in 1976, so nothing in the house is grandfathered in and everything had to be brought up to code. Well, that left me with a little problem, because in order to build stairs up to code, they're not going to fit the space. Not only are they not going to fit the space, I want stairs that you can see through so that the space remains as open as possible, and well, code doesn't allow for that. So what do you do when you need a staircase that's not up to code, but you still have to pass final inspection? Well, you build a fake staircase to fool the inspector. So with final inspection right around the corner, I got to work. Now, I did some searching online to figure out what code actually was, and in our area, the rise needed to be no more than 7.5 inches, and the run could be no more than, I think, 10.5 inches? Don't quote me on that, but it was something along those lines. Now, with the space that we have to put the stairs, that made things kind of difficult. Because in order for the rise and run to be up to code, the stairs would come out so close to the front door that when you open that front door, there would only be a couple of inches between the front door and the front of the stairs. Not ideal. The other thing that code says you have to do is when you have a span wider than 36 inches, you need to include not 1, not 2, but 3 separate stringers to support the stairs. This seems like a good idea for strength, but when you want a staircase that you can see through to leave the space open, well, that's not ideal. It's almost like they don't take design into consideration when they write these codes. They just want to keep people safe and they don't care what things look like. The other thing code says is that on your risers, you can't have a gap that's bigger than 4 inches, which means I had to add these little toe kicks to all the riser sections so that, I don't know, somebody couldn't army crawl under a step. And then, of course, you need a railing, which also can't have a gap bigger than 4 inches. So it's got to be pretty big and bulky like this. Don't worry, I'm going to fill in that upper section as well. And there you have it, an up-to-code set of stairs. They're ugly, but they're up to code. My plan worked. We passed final inspection with the fake staircase, so now it was time to build the real staircase, which meant that after spending all that time and money building the fake staircase, well, I had to rip those ones out. It's pretty crazy that this set of stairs passed inspection. I mean, they are strong, they're up to code in every sense of the word, but boy are they ugly. They also cost me about $500 to make, and all that money just so that I could pass final inspection and build the stairs that I actually wanted to build. So I ripped off the toe kicks, I ripped off the treads, and then I started taking down all of my stringers. Now you might be saying, aren't you worried that the inspector's going to watch this video and come back and make you change them? Well, he can't. He already passed my final inspection. So if I decide to change something after the fact, the only way that it could affect anything is if I want to sell the house later down the road. So I got the old staircase out, and it was finally time to start building the new staircase. All right, here we go, the fun part, the stairs that are actually going to look somewhat nice. The first thing I did was make a plumb bob out of a piece of string and a screwdriver to figure out all my measurements. Then I went out to the garage of the cabin and I started cutting down scrap pieces of plywood. Now I didn't want to build the final set of stairs at the cabin because I'm limited on tools. So my overall plan was to make a stringer template that was the exact size and shape of the stairs I want, and then I can take the template back to my main shop and build all the stairs there. The only problem is a sheet of plywood isn't long enough for a stringer, so I had to hook 2 pieces of plywood together with this sort of brace piece in the middle. The other thing I forgot was my square with my little stops on it, so I had to make a jig to get my rise and run perfect, which is really easy to do with a scrap piece of wood. All you do is measure out the rise on one side, the run on the other side, you connect those 2 points, and you cut a triangle. I'm just using the track saw real quick, zip zap zoop, kind of like this. And voila, a triangle with the rise and run of my staircase. Then you need a fence to hold it right along the edge of your stringer. So I cut a piece of plywood on the table saw, chopped it down to the right size over on the miter saw, and it'll hook on like this. To hook it on, I just used a little CA glue, spritzed some accelerator spray. If I can get the lid off, there we go. Spritz, spritz, spritz. And plopped it in place. It really doesn't matter if it's square, you just need a fence to hold it in place along your stringer. I also added a few screws just so the CA glue didn't fail and I'd have to rebuild it. With my template made, I was ready to start laying out the rise and run for my staircase. So I went over to my pre-made plywood stringer template and I started drawing things out. Whenever I build stairs, I like to use a stair tread calculator. There's a really good one at mycarpentry.com. You just enter in your rise, your run, the height of your stairs, the distance that they're going to come out, and it gives you exact dimensions on how you have to build your stringers. Then you can make your stringer template according to that, and then all you have to do is trace it on the side of your board, just like this. You trace your rise, your run, and you move it down, connect the dots, and you do the same thing over again. I mean, it's pretty darn simple. So I worked my way all the way down the board until I had the right number of steps on my stringer, and then it was time to start cutting them out. Because this is going to be my template piece, I wanted to be as accurate as I possibly could. So I figured a track saw would probably be the best way to make all of my cuts, because I could stick the track right along the pencil line and get pretty darn close to perfect. The only downside to the track saw is it won't cut all the way into that steep angle. So I cut most of the way and then I finished it off by hand with a Japanese pole saw. But even cutting that last little bit by hand, I still managed to get pretty precise cuts. With almost all of my stringers cut out, I carried the piece inside to test to see how it fit in the space. Now, I had every intention that I was going to have to go back and forth and make multiple adjustments on this. The thing I wasn't sure about was whether or not the stringer would clear the trim around that door frame. But when I carried the stringer template inside and stuck it up, I was shocked that it was absolutely perfect on the very first try. I mean, look at the clearance over the trim around the door. You can't plan that. Sometimes you just get lucky. And just like that, I had my stringer template made and I was ready to start building the official sets of stairs. So with my stringer template made, I knew the size of the staircase that I wanted. Rise, run, I knew where I wanted it to land on the landing, I knew where I wanted it to land on the floor. The only thing I didn't know is exactly what I wanted the stairs to look like. That part still baffled me. So we went to the cabin and we made this stringer template, ensured that it fit perfect, which it does. And the plan was always, in my mind, to cut 2 solid oak stringers that looked exactly like this. That's what the treads would rest on. And then do 2 apron boards that we would sandwich on the outside of those stringers so you wouldn't see the side of the stringers or the treads, and that would be the staircase. Once we got back to the shop and I started thinking about it and looking at the wood and looking at the stringer template, the thing I don't like with that design is we're not going to do any toe kicks. So we're just going to do treads because I want you to be able to see through the stairs. But with the stringer,
and just the treads, you're gonna be staring at the front of that stringer and all that end grain. So I had a crazy idea this morning that what if we eliminated the stringers altogether? No stringers, which is not what you're supposed to do with stairs. We're still gonna have stringers, but instead of stringers and an apron piece, my thought is, why don't we just make that apron piece really thick, and we'll just attach the treads directly to the apron piece. We'll use the stringer as a template to get everything laid out right, and that's just the staircase, just 2 apron piece / stringers with steps. I think this is gonna work. We're using 1.5" solid white oak for the treads, so that's gonna be plenty strong. I'm gonna use the Trex structural screws, like 8-inch long ones on both sides. I don't know. I'm not a stair builder. In my mind, it all checks out. The only way to really figure out if it's gonna work is just to do it. So let's go.
So the first thing I needed to do was to cut down pieces for my stringers / apron boards. The only problem is these pieces are over 13 feet long, and my shop's just not that big. I don't have that much room behind my table saw. So I thought, well, maybe I could just open this barn door right here, show where my hot water heater and inline vacuum cleaner are stored, and that'll give me a little extra room. So I slid that barn door to the side like that, pulled the board back, and it still didn't give me enough room to run it through the table saw. So then I thought, well, there's more room to the left of the hot water heater, so if I just angle the table saw kind of like this, then I can pull it all the way back against the wall, and well, yeah, that still didn't give me enough room. So I pushed the table saw forward a little bit, opened my garage door, and then I had enough room just to run a board through the table saw. I really hope the entire build isn't this difficult. So with Craig's help, we started running that 8/4 solid white oak through the table saw. Thankfully, this Powermatic table saw had no problem slicing through that stuff like butter. Zip, zap, zoop. For the stairs, I'm using Oregon white oak because I thought it most closely matched the existing white oak floor. My local lumber supplier, the Hardwood Center, out on Highway 20 between Albany and Corvallis, if you live in the Albany-Corvallis area, check them out, managed to find me 14-foot runs, which was awesome. They even found one piece that was wide enough for one of the sides. I'm going to use that for the outside. But for the inside, I'm going to have to glue 2 pieces together to get my other apron / stringer piece. So after ripping those 2 pieces down to the right width to net 11¼ inches, I laid my stringer template on there just to kind of get an idea of how everything was going to fit. Now because these boards are so long, gluing them up is going to be a nightmare without a little assistance. So I decided to sink some dominoes in that seam to help with alignment. The other pain to these boards being this long in a small shop is that every time I needed to turn them around, I needed Craig to help me. We had to walk outside the shop, spin them around, dodge kids on bicycles, and then take them back inside. It sure added some time to the overall project, but we managed to get it done in the end. Once all my holes were mortised out for my dominoes, I started playing in my own personal game of whack-a-mole, pounding those dominoes into place, getting ready to glue those 2 pieces together. And then you'll never guess what happened next. Well, maybe you will if you're paying attention. I glued those 2 pieces together with glue. Pretty crazy. You don't need a lot of glue, and to be honest, you don't even need the dominoes. Those are just there for alignment, so I didn't even glue the dominoes in place. I just sprinkled some glue in between the crack, pounded the entire thing together, and added some clamps. And just like that, 2 pieces of solid oak become 1, and we're on to step 2. Or 8 or 12, whatever step we're on now. I mean, look how big and long this thing... Oh, probably shouldn't do that motion. It was a pretty hot day in the shop, so after about 30 or 40 minutes, I removed the clamps, my glue was dry, and I plopped on that stringer template to start figuring out the overall shape of my side pieces. Now the first thing I was going to do is cut the angles on the top and bottom, because those have to stay the exact same as the stringer template. That's the most important part, where it lands at the top and where it lands at the bottom. So after tracing out the overall shape, I cut it down to the right size, again just using the track saw. It looked something like this. And then before doing anything else, I just double checked to make sure that it was the exact same size as the stringer, which it was. Then I did the exact same thing to my other piece. Fortunately, this was just a solid piece of oak. We didn't have to glue this one up, it just happened to be wide enough right off the shelf. I also had my local supplier pre-mill these, straight line them, so that it saved me a lot of work in the milling process. And because I used dominoes for alignment, all I had to do was sand that seam and it was pretty good. I also had them pre-cut and mill all of my treads. They were the right width, they were the right thickness. All I was gonna have to do is cut them down to the right length. So after doing a little math, I set up a little stop block over on my miter saw and I started chopping them all down. Zip zap zoop, making sure after each one that I just double checked that measurement. I didn't want that stop block to move and have some longer than the other ones. I think I needed 11 steps in total, including the step at the very top. Once I had all my steps cut down, it was time to start figuring out where those steps needed to land on my stringer pieces. Now because I'm eliminating the traditional stringer and I'm just going to tie the steps right into the apron pieces, I need to adjust the positioning a little bit. Because I don't want the step to be too close to the front, I want it to be centered in the middle of the stringer board. So I continued the line from my stringer template all the way across my board, because the angle is going to be the same, regardless of where that step lands. I did this and worked my way all the way down each board. Then I had to figure out how to center those steps. So it's kind of confusing when you're dealing with an 1.5-inch thick step. You need the same distance at that point as you have at that point, and the same distance at that point that you have at that point. And I think that will center the step, but I'm not sure, but it sounded good. Then I marked out where every single step should land, so I would have a reference point to get them all lined up. I kind of did a little picking and choosing, moving the different grain patterns around, deciding where I wanted knots, so I wanted to make sure I got all the steps back in the proper place. So I used a permanent marker to number each step so that assembly would go a little smoother. You know, always plan ahead.
Oh, hi. This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN. Now you're probably like, what's a VPN? Well, a VPN is like a pair of pants. It keeps all your private stuff, you know, concealed and safe when you step outside, but it still allows you to step outside. Protects you online. When might you need a VPN? Price discrimination. You heard me right, price discrimination. Now, did you know that if you're buying like tickets or hotels or renting a car, that the internet, it will change the price depending on where you're located? Ooh, Beverly Hills, they must have some money. We're gonna charge them a lot. Use a VPN, Surfshark, because then the internet's not gonna know where you are and you're gonna make sure you get the best price. I'm gonna start doing that. You're out in public and all of a sudden there's free public Wi-Fi. You're like, oh great, I'll just get on this free Wi-Fi. And then you wanna check your bank account. Is there a hacker over there drinking a cup of coffee who's gonna steal my information? Well, that's another benefit to Surfshark is it protects you when you're using public Wi-Fi. Oh no, it's 3 a.m. and I need to talk to customer service about my Surfshark account. It's okay, because they got 24-hour customer service. You're probably thinking, if Surfshark VPN is so great, do they have other products that are just as great? If you're like me, you've probably had your credit card number stolen a handful of times, but with Surfshark Alert, it's like scouring the internet, checking everything. And the second that your email or ID or credit card information is leaked, boom, alert from Surfshark. I like to use Surfshark VPN to get discounted airline tickets. Now, if you want to try it out, just go to surfshark.com/bourbon and use bourbon at checkout to get 4 months extra of Surfshark VPN. And if you don't love it, it's fine because they got a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just click the link down in the video description.
With all of my step positioning laid out, it was time to hook the steps to the stringer/apron sideboards. Now, I didn't want to try and hold them in place while I sank in screws, so I wanted to figure out some way to make sure alignment was a little easier. I figured dominoes would probably be the best bet. So I added dominoes both to my sideboard and my step, just using the edge of my step as a reference surface to get everything lined up. It's pretty easy to do it this way. This is a really good technique for doing shelves in the middle of a cabinet as well. It just makes it simpler because you don't have to add marks to your boards. You just use the boards as your marks. Does that make any sense at all? Basically, as long as you put the domino joiner in the same spot along your line, then everything should work out all right. Kind of like this. Did a little test fit on the first step. It fit exactly where I wanted it to, so I figured I was pretty good to go for the remaining steps. So I lit a few scented candles, plopped on some Enya, and I got to work, dominoing all the remaining steps until they were all ready to, well, have dominoes in them. On the inside of each one of these pieces, I am mortising out for dominoes to align the steps, but on the outside of each one of the pieces, I have to mark for screws to hook those steps together. Because my template only goes one way, on the second board, first I marked out for the screws on the back side. But then I had to mark out for the dominoes on the inside, and as you can see, because of the way that I braced that template, it doesn't want to sit flush in the direction that I need it to. So, gonna have to fix that. Oopsie doopsie. Fortunately, it was a pretty easy fix. All I had to do was add another brace piece to the opposite side, screw that down, and then once that was hooked in place, holding my entire template together, then I could flip the entire thing over and remove the brace piece on the other side. Now I wish I would have thought ahead and not glued it down, but luckily it's plywood, so the glue popped free pretty quickly. And then I could mark out for all of those dominoes on the inside of my opposite piece, doing the exact same method that I did on the first one. So I'm not gonna show you that entire process because I already showed you on one side, and spoiler alert, it's pretty much exactly the same on the other side. So pretty soon I had both sides mortised out for dominoes to align all of my steps. Now only one of the sides is going to be visible, the outside. The other side's going to be against a wall, but I still need to countersink all of my screws so that they sit below the surface of that oak. And then on one side I'm going to have to plug them. So I wanted to be really nice and neat with where I added all of my screw holes. So I made this little template out of scrap pieces of wood that made sure that all of my holes would be drilled in exactly the same place and also be perfectly centered on the step. I didn't want to drill a hole big enough for a pencil, plus the pencil tip wiggles around and it's not that accurate, so I just used a little drill bit, drilled just a little bit into the wood, and then I used that little pilot hole to reference my Forstner bit. Now obviously I couldn't fit this giant 13.5 foot piece of white oak under my drill press. Thankfully I had this sweet little Rockler portable drill press thingamawhatsit. You just hook a hand drill into it and it's kind of like a drill press you can use anywhere. I've never used this before and it's been in my shop for years. So I was actually pretty excited to pull it out of the bag and use it. I take that back. I used it at the cabin once when I was doing the trim. But this is the first time I've used it in my shop. So that still counts for something, right? Anyways, in no time I had all those holes drilled and I was almost ready for assembly. Just a few little finishing things first, like rounding over all of the edges with a nice little 1/8 inch round over bit. Because, you know, it makes it soft and nice to the touch. And that's what you want in a set of stairs. Them to be touchable. Like they're saying, come here to me. Climb up me. Ascend. Descend. Anyways, after I rounded over everything, I sanded everything smooth. Because, well, you're not going to sand things rough. Nobody does that I know of. Maybe painters. I digress. Now, I want to match the stairs to the floor, which is this color here on the floor sample. So I got some Rubio Pure and I got some Rubio Walnut, and I was pretty convinced it was going to be one of these two colors, or maybe a little of both. First, I tested the Rubio Pure, and I gotta say, it wasn't too far off. It was just a little bit too yellow. Then I tested just the straight Rubio Walnut. And as you can see here, after I wipe it off, it was close, but it was just a little bit too dark. A little too much black going on in there. Pure to yellow, walnut to black. Ah, you see where I'm going with this. Next, I did a 50-50 mix. Half pure, half walnut. Did a little test on that, and I think we're pretty darn close to perfect. That has to be one of my favorite things about Rubio, is that you're not locked into a single color. If they don't have the color you want, you just start mixing things together until you find it, which also makes you feel like a painter, like Bob Ross. Happy little trees. Now, I had no clue how much of this I was going to need, and obviously I didn't want to have to make more as I went. Plus, there's other things in the house that I want to match to the floor, so I just made up a ton of it. I mixed 1 can of Pure with 1 can of Walnut, kind of mixed it around in a few cups to make sure it was all mixed together evenly. The only thing I didn't do was add the hardener, because once you add the hardener, well, it's got a shelf life. And then I changed the name from Pure to Pure Nut, because, well, that sounds cool. Happy little trees. Then the only thing left to do was to take my newly mixed custom Pure Nut color and smear it all over my various parts and pieces of the stairs. Not my various parts and pieces. That would be very, very weird, and, well, we're not going to do that on this channel. Thankfully, Craig was such a kind lad and came in to lend me a hand getting everything finished up. You can see this Oregon walnut has some really cool grain going on, and I can't wait to get these stairs completely assembled. While I was waiting for the Rubio to dry, I made some plugs out of a few of the offcuts that I will use to plug all those screw holes. Plug cutting's so much fun. I mean, look at this thing. I just don't know why it always burns the outside of the plug. If anyone has some tips on how to keep the outside of the plug from burning, let me know, because, well, it'd be nice if it didn't do that. With all my plugs kind of cut, I went over to the bandsaw and freed them from their bonds. See how burnt those are on the side? Why? Why does it do that? And then it was time to start hooking the staircase together. So we pounded our dominoes into all those pre-drilled mortises that we made for alignment's sake. Once we got all those in there, I read the bottom of each one of my steps, and I plopped those in place in the correct order, making sure everything went back in the way that we originally had it assembled. This is why I also used permanent marker to mark all those, because you can sand over permanent marker and you can still see your marks. If you mark it with pencil, well, you're probably gonna sand your pencil line away, and then you're gonna be like, what? Where does this go? I don't know. I sanded the pencil line off. Oh no! Ah! Happy little trees. Pretty soon we had all of our steps aligned on one of our boards, then we added dominoes to the other board. I figured it'd be easier to add the dominoes to this whole board than add the dominoes to the top of each step. And then Craig helped me carry that one over and put it in place. You can see the bottom of that is unfinished because that's going to be the finished outside edge that you're going to see. So I was going to wait till I plugged all those holes before I put finish on that piece. Now we were right in the middle of starting to get this all lined up. Things were going really good. And that's when this happened.
The Oh, my life is.
You can go.
For those of you that don't know, Craig is my next door neighbor, and that was his wife calling my wife to tell him that his Traeger grill was on fire on their back porch. So he had to run over there and put that fire out. Literally. But he got it out pretty quick and then managed to come back over and help me get everything assembled. The only problem was that we had the two pieces resting on stools and there was a little bit of a bow in the middle, which is making getting the boards lined up really difficult. So we added some sawhorses to straighten everything out, and then with a little taparoo with the hammer, we managed to get everything fit together with those dominoes. Then all I had to do was screw it in place. I got this really nice, very long drill bit at the store. Drilled some pilot holes, but then I realized because there was a gap that left a bunch of sawdust in between our apron piece and the step. So before I screwed them together, I had to go through and clean out all that sawdust, or else there'd be a gap and, it wouldn't come together properly. Then I dipped each one of my structural screws in just a little bit of paste wax to help it go in easier. Grabbed the impact driver and a zip zap zooped those things together. Easy peasy, those boards squeezy. And I was very pleased to see a nice tight fit. That's what we're looking for. At this point, everything was going so smooth. I was like, this is great. Until it wasn't. This is where I almost destroyed the entire staircase. Well, not me personally. It was gravity.
Call Craig. Tell him to come over here quick.
Do you want me to help you?
You can't. It's too heavy.
Calling, but I don't know if he's gonna answer. I'm gonna run over there. Are you sure I can't help?
There's no way you're gonna be able to lift it.
Hi, Jason says I'm too weak, but he's trapped in the shop with the stairs falling over.
Then hurry.
And he said to hurry. Sorry for all your emergencies today.
Hey, wait. Adjust the camera first.
One huge perk to having Craig as a neighbor is that his response time in case of emergencies is pretty quick. He ran over, helped me right the ship, or stairs in this case, get some new sawhorses under there, and disaster was avoided. With the stairs secure on some brand new sawhorses, I started plugging all of my screw holes. Just a little bit of glue, a little bit of a plug, and a little tap with the hammer. Still don't know why the sides are so burnt on those. Oh, it drives me crazy. Maybe paste wax on the drill bit. I don't know. Maybe I just gotta slow down and not do so many at once. I have no clue. Once all the holes are plugged, I went back with a flush trim saw. Now make sure you're using a flush trim saw, not just a regular pole saw. Regular pole saw, the teeth are angled and it'll scuff up your wood. A flush trim saw, the teeth are straight. You can put it right on the wood and it won't scar it all up. In case you didn't know that. After flush trimming all my plugs, I sanded down all of them smooth, and then I rubbed on that custom Pure Nut Rubio. And just like that, the stairs were complete. Now they just have to be installed. And did I mention they weigh like 500 pounds? I mean, we might look like we're having a grand old time here, but between you and me, we were struggling to lift this into the trailer. And that's another thing. I had no clue whether or not they were even going to fit in the trailer. I mean, they're 13.5 feet long, and I got a 12-foot trailer. But mathematics says if you put something at a diagonal, then it will fit in your trailer. So we drove over the mountain to the cabin, got there in the dead of night, and decided now's as good a time as any to install a set of stairs, right? After struggling just to carry the stairs into the trailer, Craig and I decided it would probably be a good idea to have an extra set of hands. So we called my friend Jeff, who was more than happy to drive 2 hours out of the way in the middle of the night to install a set of stairs. Because that's just the type of friend he is. Now, at this point, we still weren't quite sure how we were going to lift these. We talked about this and we talked about that. We talked about different ideas and techniques. We said maybe we could do this or maybe we could do that. And then eventually I said, I know what we're going to do. And this is what it was. Step 1, get a scrap piece of 2x4 and screw it to the beam that the stairs are going to be attached to. This is going to act as sort of a shelf for us to rest the stairs on and put it in the proper positioning. Step 2, lift the giant staircase into place with every single muscle you have in your entire body and try not to crush you or your friends while you're doing it. That flimsy little 2x4 is looking a little suspect right now. But that brings me to step 3. Once you have this giant 500-pound staircase resting on a flimsy little 2x4, you move out of the way, have your friends stand underneath it, and you climb to safety. But only to put what I like to call a safety strap around the stairs. This is going to ensure that the stairs don't come plummeting down off of that 2x4. Once the stairs were in position, Craig used some tape to mark out exactly where the stairs landed on the floor. This will bring us to step 4, which is get your friends back under the stairs, unhook the safety strap, and then lower them back down onto the floor. Very carefully. Are you with me so far? Because this seems like a lot of steps to install one staircase. But we're not done yet. Step 12. Once the stairs are lowered safely down to the floor, you drill holes through those pre-marked locations where the bottom of your stairs are going to land. This is so you can attach the bottom of the stairs to the floor, eventually. Once both holes are drilled, you take your giant drill bit and you pound it into one of the holes, kind of like this, until it's flush with the top of the floor. That'll come to play later. Then you lift the stairs back up into position, once again resting the entire staircase on that flimsy little 2x4 that you screwed to the beam. Then you get your friends to remove the blanket on the bottom while you hook the safety strap on the top. Then you secure the stairs to the beam using 6 structural screws to make sure that it will never come crashing down on anyone's head. Step 26. You crawl under the house through the dirt and muck and try and locate that drill bit that you pounded through the floor upstairs. I did eventually manage to find the drill bit poking through the floor, but unfortunately it was not easy to get to. It involved a lot of army crawling and a lot of dirt. Eventually I sank a screw through the floor into the stairs, and that's when things started to get really weird. I heard little children's voices, and then somebody grabbed my headlamp. I managed to find it again, but I swear, there was a little hand on my shoulder. With the stairs securely installed, it was just time to beautify them a little bit, so I added plugs to those upper screw holes to hide those, tapped them in place with a little glue, and then I flush trimmed them all. This, of course, scarred up my freshly rubioed brace piece, so after I flush trimmed them, I sanded them all down, kind of like this, and then I smeared on a fresh coat of rubio, kind of like this. Man, that pure nut looks good. Then I had to tie the flooring upstairs into the top of the stairs themselves. So I cut this piece of scrap white oak. You're only going to see the bottom of it. That's why it's got these weird marks on the top. That was an experiment I was doing in my shop. That might come into a video later down the road. Anyways, I screwed that scrap piece of white oak onto the top of the stairs. That's kind of like the subfloor. And then I'm going to bring the actual hardwood floor over the top of that until it's flush with that white oak piece I just added. So I cut some flooring, I slid it into place, and then the flooring comes with this like bullnose strip piece, so I cut one of those, I slid that into place, and the upper floor was now beautifully tied into the top of the stairs. Ta-da! Remember that upper brace piece that I spent all that time plugging and sanding down and flush trimming and putting new Rubio on? Yeah, after getting the stairs installed, I decided I hated it. It just didn't look right that that was oak when it was against a white beam. So I made a last-minute decision to paint it white. I very carefully taped everything off and then did 3 or 4 coats of white paint to match the beam, and I thought it looked so much better. And just like that, the stairs were completely finished. Well, they still need a handrail, but other than the handrail, they're completely finished. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with how these turned out. They're simple, they're clean, and they don't clog up that entry space with bulky stairs, which is exactly what I wanted.
Well, there you have it. My final set of stairs. Yes, I'm still gonna put a railing on the wall. I'm not a monster. No, I'm not gonna put anything on this side. If people want to fall off the stairs to their death, well, that's their own issue. I gotta say, code is great. I understand why it's there, but sometimes it just gets in the way. These stairs are so much better than what is legally required. The fact that you can open the door, see right through them, it's the most minimalistic staircase that I could have put in here. Well, I could have done some weird cantilevered floating thing, but I'm not an engineer. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. Check the link in the video description. There's all the parts and pieces and any specialty tools I used. There's a link down there to our new universal table saw jig, our bourbon blade, Patreon, all sorts of stuff. So check that out. Now, just gonna sit here, relax, and never build stairs again. Ugh.